It was just another routine day at the Las Vegas Police Department. Officers were processing arrests, answering calls, and filing paperwork. The hum of conversation and the occasional radio chatter filled the room. Suddenly, the glass doors swung open, and the entire room went silent. A tall, well-dressed figure stepped inside, moving with a steady and purposeful stride. It was Donald Trump, the President of the United States, walking into the station. Gasps rippled through the room as officers exchanged confused glances. Was this real? There were no Secret Service agents in sight, making the situation even stranger. Sergeant Mike Carson, a seasoned cop with 2 decades on the force, straightened his posture, his instincts kicking in. What was the leader of the free world doing here? Whispers spread quickly, some officers instinctively fixing their uniforms, while others simply stood there, stunned. No one had been told about a presidential visit. Was this some kind of drill or a misunderstanding? Finally, Sergeant Mike Carson stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. President, sir, is there something we can help you with?" His voice was polite, yet filled with curiosity. Trump scanned the precinct, his eyes sweeping the room as though searching for something or someone. Then, in his signature direct manner, he spoke. "I need to see your chief of police immediately." Mike hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Right this way, sir." He gestured for Trump to follow. Officers remained frozen in place, their eyes locked on the most powerful man in the country. Chief Angela Ruiz was in her office, reviewing reports from the previous night. She was a no-nonsense leader, highly respected by her team, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. A knock at the door was followed by Sergeant Carson's voice. "Chief, we have an unexpected guest." Before she could respond, the door swung open, and in walked Donald Trump. Ruiz's jaw tightened. "Mr. President," she stood up from her desk and extended her hand. "It's an honor, sir. What brings you to our department?" Trump shook her hand, but wasted no time in getting to the point. "I need your help with something personal." Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "Personal?" She had expected an official visit, not this. Trump reached into the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out a small, worn photograph. The edges were curled, and the colors were fading. He gently placed it on the desk in front of her. Ruiz glanced at the photo. It showed a young boy standing next to a uniformed officer. The officer's hand rested protectively on the boy's shoulder, looking proud. The chief frowned. "Who is this?" Trump's voice softened. "That boy is me, and that officer saved my life." Sergeant Carson leaned in slightly, his eyes widening. "Sir, are you saying?" Trump interrupted. "I never got to thank him properly. Now I need to find him, or his family." Chief Ruiz picked up the photograph and studied it. The officer in the photo was smiling, his uniform crisp. There was something noble about the way he stood, proud of his duty. Ruiz looked up. "Who was he?" Trump exhaled, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "His name was Officer Daniel Brooks. When I was 17, I was in Las Vegas, making reckless choices. One night, I nearly ruined my life. But this man, he stopped me. He didn't just arrest me. He talked to me, gave me advice that I've never forgotten." Ruiz exchanged glances with Carson. This was unlike anything they had ever expected. "You want us to find him or his families?" Trump nodded firmly. "I owe him everything." Trump leaned back in his chair, lost in thought, remembering that fateful night in 1964 when he was just another teenager trying to prove himself. His friends had dared him to do something reckless, something illegal. Like many young men, he let pride guide his choices. But just as things were about to go too far, a police officer appeared. "Kid," the officer had said, placing a firm but understanding hand on Trump's shoulder. "This ain't the path for you. You've got a future. Don't throw it away over a stupid mistake." Trump listened, and it changed the course of his life. "Now," he said, staring at Chief Ruiz, "I want to find him or his family and do right by him." Ruiz nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Trump's request. "Sir, I appreciate the story and I respect what you're trying to do. But this was a long time ago. Officer Brooks may not even be alive." Trump's jaw tightened. then find his family. Someone out there deserves to hear this story. Someone should know that their father, their grandfather, changed a life. Ruiz glanced at Sergeant Carson, who gave a small nod, already mentally preparing for a deep dive into the old records. "All right," Ruiz said. "We'll do our best. Just know that these things take time." "I've got time," Trump replied. "Just promise me you'll find them." Hours later, Sergeant Carson sat in front of an old police database, scrolling through dusty digital archives. Officer Daniel Brooks was a name lost in history, but Carson wasn't giving up. He searched through arrest logs, patrol reports, and even news articles from the 1960s. It wasn't easy, but after hours of digging, he found something, a personnel file. There he was, Officer Daniel Brooks, badge number 4523. Retired in 1985. Deceased in 2013. Carson exhaled, rubbing his temples. He didn't want to be the one to tell Trump that the man he was looking for had already passed. But then he noticed something in the file. Next of kin, Emma Brooks. He had found her. Carson rushed back to Chief Ruiz's office, where Trump was still waiting, staring at the old photograph. "Sir," Carson began hesitantly, "I have good news and bad news." Trump looked up, his eyes sharp. "Give me the bad news first." Carson took a deep breath. Officer Daniel Brooks passed away 10 years ago. For the first time, Trump looked genuinely saddened. He swallowed hard. "And the good news?" Carson hesitated. "He has a daughter, Emma Brooks. She still lives in Las Vegas." Trump stood up. "Then we find her. Right now." Ruiz blinked. "Sir, we don't even know if she wants to." Trump cut her off. "She deserves to know what kind of man her father was." Trump, Carson, and a small security team drove through the suburbs of Las Vegas to find Emma. The drive was quiet, with Carson explaining what little he knew about her. Emma was in her 40s, working a regular job, and never in the public eye. She lived in a modest single-story home, likely unaware that her father had left such a lasting impact on one of the most powerful men in the world. When they arrived at her house, Trump took a deep breath. This was personal, no cameras, no politics, just a man fulfilling a promise. He knocked on the door. Moments later, it creaked open. Emma stood there, confused. Her eyes widened as she recognized Trump. "Mr. President?" she asked, her voice a mix of shock and confusion. Trump gave a small nod. "Emma Brooks." She hesitated, gripping the edge of the door. He held up the old photograph. "Your father saved my life when I was 17. I never got to thank him." Emma's breath hitched. Her eyes flickered between the photo and Trump. "My dad, Officer Brooks." She shook her head in disbelief. This has to be a mistake." Trump's voice softened. "It's not. Your father changed my life. And I need to tell you what he did for me." Emma's lips trembled as she opened the door wider. "Come in." The living room was simple but cozy, with worn-out couches and family photos on the walls. Trump sat down as Emma stared at the photograph in his hand. "He was a good man," she whispered. "The best. But no one ever remembered him like this." Trump nodded. "He saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. He stopped me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Emma swallowed hard. "He gave everything to this city. But after he retired, we struggled. When he passed, no one came. No honors. It was like he was forgotten." Trump's jaw clenched. "Not anymore." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Why now?" Trump met her gaze. "Because some debts should never go unpaid." Emma hesitated, then spoke more. "After Dad retired, we barely made ends meet. He never talked about his work much, but I knew he cared about people, about this city. But when he passed, there was nothing left. No pension, no help. I had to sell our home just to survive." Trump's expression darkened. He had always respected the police force, but this, a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others, shouldn't have been abandoned in his final years. Emma shook her head. "I don't want pity, Mr. President. I just miss my dad." Trump sat forward. "Your father didn't just change my life. He saved it. And I'm going to make sure his name is remembered." That evening, Trump made several calls. This wasn't about politics, it was about justice. He contacted the Las Vegas mayor to ensure Officer Brooks would be honored. Then, he reached out to organizations that support the families of fallen officers. But that wasn't enough. He made one more call to a real estate developer he trusted. The next morning, Emma woke up to a knock at the door. Trump stood there again, holding an envelope. "What's this?" she asked cautiously. Trump handed it to her. "Your new home." Emma's hands shook as she opened the envelope, revealing the deed to a fully paid house in a safe, comfortable neighborhood. Tears spilled down her face. "Why would you do this?" Trump smiled. "Because your father would have done the same for me." A week later, the Las Vegas Police Department held a ceremony in honor of Officer Daniel Brooks. The press was there, but Trump made it clear that this wasn't about politics. Emma stood at the front, beside Chief Ruiz and Sergeant Carson, as a bronze plaque was unveiled in front of the station. It read, "Officer Daniel Brooks, 1940 to 2013. A hero is not forgotten. His kindness shaped a future. His legacy lives on." Emma touched the plaque, overcome with emotion. "Dad would have never believed this," she whispered. Trump stepped forward. "Your father was more than a police officer. He was a mentor, a protector, a hero." A standing ovation erupted from the crowd. After the ceremony, Emma stood quietly, watching officers stop to read the words on the plaque. Trump approached her. "How are you feeling?" Emma took a shaky breath. "It's overwhelming, but it's right." Trump nodded. "Heroes should never be forgotten." She turned to him, her voice thick with emotion. "You could have just let this go. You didn't have to do any of this." Trump looked at the plaque. "Your father didn't have to stop me that night. But he did. That's what real heroes do." Emma wiped away a tear. "Thank you. Not just for me, for him." Trump gave a small nod. "Your father deserved this." Before leaving Las Vegas, Trump arranged for a scholarship fund in Officer Brooks's name to help the children of police officers. When Emma heard the news, she broke down crying. "Dad would have loved this," she whispered. "He always believed in second chances." The fund's first recipient was a young cadet who had nearly dropped out due to financial struggles. When he received the news, he said, "I don't know who Officer Brooks was, but if he inspired the president, then I want to be like him." Trump heard about the young man and smiled. The cycle of goodness was continuing. As he boarded his plane back to Washington, he looked out at the Las Vegas skyline and whispered, "Thank you, Officer Brooks." On the flight back, Trump sat in silence, deep in thought. So many people had helped shape his life, but Officer Brooks had been one of the first. He had no idea that the man who stopped him from making a mistake all those years ago would still be changing lives long after he was gone. He thought about Emma, about the officers at the precinct, and about the young cadet who now had a future because of one man's simple act of kindness. Maybe that's what true leadership is about, not just power, but gratitude. Trump closed his eyes, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The story of Officer Brooks spread across the nation. News outlets covered the ceremony, and social media buzzed with the tale of a forgotten hero finally being honored. People began sharing their own stories of officers, teachers, and strangers who had changed their lives in small but meaningful ways. The message was clear: sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones we never see in the headlines. Trump, watching the response, simply smiled. This wasn't about him. This was about a debt repaid, a man honored, and a legacy restored. Months later, Emma received a letter. It was from a young officer in training. "Dear Miss Brooks, I joined the force because I read about your father. I want to be the kind of cop who changes lives just like he did. Thank you for sharing his story." Emma held the letter close, smiling through tears. Her father was never forgotten, and neither was his lesson. One act of kindness can change the world.